She realized that we can do it, mother and daughter, but she couldn't do it with her mother, my 할머니, and herself. And one day she said, I wish I could share my stories with your grandmother. It's not like we didn't love each other. I loved her, she loved me, but we didn't know how to express and share painful stories vulnerably.
Join us as we explore the hidden histories of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander people. Together, we hope to provide healing and strengthen cultural pride. This is Roots Reclaimed.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joanne Rondilla, and today I am here on the beautiful campus of California State East Bay. And today I will be talking to Dr. Kyoung Mi Choi about her book, The Child Behind the Bushes, A Daughter's Healing Journey of Intergenerational Trauma. Okay, Kyoung Mi, so thank you so much for joining me today because I'm so excited to talk about your book, The Child Behind the Bushes. And the subtitle is A Daughter's Healing Journey of Intergenerational Trauma. So to begin, what is intergenerational trauma?
The trauma that is not happened in my generation, but passed down from maybe 1 to 3 generations before of me. And that generation going through so many challenges in their lives, especially wars, poverty, discrimination, oppression, and in many cases, they haven't really resolved and processed trauma. So it passed down to their offsprings without knowing they actually giving that psychological difficulties and pain to their next generations. And we talked about it, but through this book, writing this book with my mom, I was able to actually identify how that affect me in my relationship, psychologically, every aspect in my life, and trying to describe how I processed that with my mom, who actually discovered her intergenerational trauma from previous generations.
Okay, so you talked about, thank you for that definition, or at least that baseline understanding of intergenerational trauma. Can you give us a little background about who you are, where you're from, where your 할머니 or grandmother or Uma, I hope I'm saying that right, where your 할머니 or Uma are from, just to establish for anyone who's listening, place. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little background about my grandmother. My grandmother was born in this poor family, and the family actually forced her to marry to this man, rich man, who just lost her first wife. So my grandmother became the second wife, and I think the relationship went pretty well until the Korean War happened. During the Korean War, my grandmother was forced to leave, right? So they left everything behind, the property and house, family members, everything she knew left. But during the Korean War, my grandfather was killed. So my grandmother, 할머니, with the 2 kids, not knowing where to go. So they became internal refugees, right? And that made them really vulnerable. But my grandmother was very, I guess, smart and also resilient. So my grandmother started a business, and that business, during that partnership with the neighbor businessman, actually took advantage of her. And she fought so hard legally, and she won. However, that cost everything about her dignity and her, her respect for herself, her life, and they had to move again. And that was really hard for my mom. And so my mom actually learned not to fight right? If something happened to you as a woman, as a not educated, even though she was so smart that she wanted to study, but the resources were so limited, right? So it's one after another. And she was sharing everything in Jeju. She couldn't stop.
Okay.
So for 3 days, I was receiving, but while I was listening to her story, I found another child behind the bushes. I realized that we are somewhat similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. She silenced that story, her experiences, for a long time, longer than I was.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because, the title of the book, The Child Behind the Bushes, and then you go through this journey where both of you are essentially the children behind the bushes, but something that I think that you left out was the way in which the both of you pulled each other out of the bushes, right? Because it seems like you two have a very loving relationship, right? It seems that you two, just have a very good, healthy communication, have good, healthy communication with each other. And I'm not trying to romanticize your
Yeah.
relationship because, again, in the book, the book shows this process of what it's like to storytell, right? I would imagine, I'm imagining your mother always being quiet, and then all of a sudden through a simple visit to a market and a simple question, or you pointing out like, Mom, I don't know you. And then her sort of, the writer in her comes out, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your mother, who she is as a person, and especially who she was before this experience in Jeju? And then,
Yes.
yeah.
Such a important question you're asking, because that surprised me. Seeing her, not her responsibilities, her role as a mother, but real human being in front of me, sharing her story as a child, her dreams, right, and difficulties. And she was sharing so vulnerably. And I was so honored to receive those stories from her, and that changed me. But that changed her so much that she became a person with joy, being able to express her happiness. At the same time, she was able to cry. And after cry, she reconnect herself and reconnect her joy again. So she wasn't afraid to go to that sadness and come out and bring her treasure, which is joy, reconnection, and resiliency. So that was beautiful to see her. And you mentioned healthy relationship. It wasn't healthy like that before, right?
Yeah.
Before Jeju, I hadn't seen her for 3 years until that moment. She stopped responding to any of my calls, my postcards, and she was really struggling with my relationship, my coming out, my marriage. That was really hard. She didn't respond to our invitation to our wedding. So she missed all of that. And then after Jeju, she shared a little bit, and I realized that this is such a amazing gift for me. You opened up, you start sharing the story. I want to continue. And my mom said, no. This is, who wants to hear this story? Why do we need to write down so other people can find, right? And so she stayed in Korea. I came to California. I had to invite her again and again. I think this is something meaningful for us and for people out there who might find it useful for their own journey. So finally she said, let's do it. I didn't even know she was a writer. And that was her aspiration and dream. I didn't know. I found out while we are writing this book. So every day after that, she wrote and took a picture of her, her writing and emailed me or sent me as a text. And every morning I saw my KakaoTalk app, which is very popular communication app. I saw her handwriting beautifully, and there's all the specific and ordered like timely. So she was really working hard every day to remember, revisit, reconnect those memories. And it wasn't really easy for her. It wasn't easy for me to understand how difficult the life and pain and all the losses she had to experience.
Yeah, because I think what's important about your mother's, Uma's story as well as Halmuni's story is their lives intersect in the backdrop of war, right? And then in the aftermath of war. And I think that informs a lot of the silence. And so by the time you have this experience with your mom and you both decide, you're going to write this book together, there has to be a transition for you where you're not the daughter you're seeing. It's almost like, not that you ever stopped being your mother's daughter, but your mother is transforming in front of you from mom to person. And so what's that?
Yes.
What's that like?
And also as a child, re-experiencing those traumatic events.
Yeah.
And sharing that as a child. She wasn't even, rationalize those stories, just so vulnerably share everything or the emotions. So I had to maybe step up, right? And I took a role of person who's holding a space for her, right? So I hold a space for her. She felt safe and comfortable to share. And it's not permanent, right? She stayed as a child and she came out as an adult, and then also expressed as a mother. So we kind of time travel, child and now and past and now and future, and that was that was very organic. And I expected that because also my professional background, right?
Yeah.
I, have been teaching counseling theories, interventions. So I was able to bring that knowledge and skills to create that. And it went myself very beautifully. And yeah, she was able to acknowledge that piece. I can trust you.
Okay, because there's a point in the book where, because you just said like you were almost like the bearer of her stories, right? Like you were the one that gave her that space, and like it's like the floodgates open,
yes.
right? But then you reach this point where you ask her, it's like you're receiving the stories from your mother, but she's not receiving the stories from you. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So she was talking, sometimes an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. In the beginning, I was okay to just receive. But when I reached a certain point, I realized that it's not sustainable, right? It has to be mutual understanding. I want her to know me, right? Not as a child, not as her daughter, as another individual actually going through my own personal growth and my journey. And she didn't give me any opportunities to do that. She was talking and talking and talking. So many times I had to stop her. And she was so angry. I was stopping her because, is that what you want? You wanted to hear me. You want to share my stories. Why you stop me? She didn't know what we are doing, and she didn't know also I want to express to her, right? And after several conflicts, and gradually she had to learn how to receive me and my stories. And later she said, she realized that we can do it, mother and daughter, but she couldn't do it with her mother, my 할머니, and herself. And one day she said, I wish I could share my stories with your grandmother. It's not like we didn't love each other. I loved her, she loved me, but we didn't know how to express and share painful stories vulnerably. That moment I realized that what we are doing, what we have been doing, it's not maybe easy to others. People never, it's so new to them, right? I'm so happy that I was able to provide and I was able to be trained with the psychological, knowledge and skills.
So without running the risk of like spoiling things, in the book, but I do want to point out, especially for people who are maybe interested in picking up the book, the book does go through 3 generations of women who have experienced sexual assaults, right? And, the way in which these 3 women, Halmoni, Uma, and then you, the way the 3 of you had to grapple with this in so much silence. And it wasn't until you were able to have these conversations with your mom that you were able to just speak the thing, right? And I think that oftentimes for women or people who have been sexually assaulted, the hardest thing to do is to speak the thing. Right? And then it's even harder when you're speaking the thing to a mother, right? Or a daughter, right? Like, I think that makes it so difficult and so vulnerable because I'm thinking about Chanel Miller. She has a book called Know My Name. And she was sexually assaulted by the Stanford swimmer. His name is Brock Turner. And, I remember in that book where she has to explain to her family that the news that, made national news, that the victim is her. And, she describes like trying to make sure that they were okay. When she was the victim, right? Because there's just something really sensitive about sharing those things like with your family, right? And I think also too, whether it's like mother to daughter or daughter to mother, because I know this in my own experience, sometimes that transmission of stories, because I know, for example, because my mom was very similar in that she didn't like to hear like my own stories or my own pain because she was afraid of the way she understood my own pain was my pain was her fault. Right. And so that's why that was never shared. And we never got to a point where we could just share for the sake of sharing, because she always felt that anything bad that happened to me was a burden that she had to bear. And that was never an expectation that I placed on her. And I think a lot of this really has to do with intergenerational trauma and the ways in which we don't really talk about that, right? Because even though, both Halmoni and Uma were still in Korea, and you were the one that immigrated, what a lot of immigrant families experience, and this was something that I learned in my own family, because I unfortunately, I don't have my parents anymore. I don't have the stories, right? The stories that I do have of my parents, I had to extract it as a scholar, right? I had to get a PhD to do this. But for me, it was, learning. The thing that I learned about my parents was, for them, because of U.S. colonialism in the Philippines, right? It was such an honor for them to come to the United States. And I think that a lot of immigrants decide that because I was given this opportunity, the price for that opportunity is I have to let go of everything that happened in the past, right? So that's why in my family we never got the stories of my father or my mother. We get them in small bits and pieces, and I've tried, for a long time to really just sort of piece together who my parents are, but they never let us in, because for them it was, that doesn't matter because that's who I was then. And I came here for you so that we can have this life. So our life starts in the United States. and what they did, because even down to language, like my brother, sister, and I, we don't know my parents' language. And so when you grow up as like the child of immigrants, you're meant to feel like you don't have a past or you don't have a history because parents inadvertently let that history go. And I think that that's where a lot of intergenerational trauma and a lot of tension between like the child of immigrants and immigrant parents come from, right? I loved that you had this experience of like being able to see your mother as like a person, right? Because I remember having that same experience with my mother because, and I can share this now because unfortunately both my parents had passed, but my parents met through letters. And my father kept the letters from my mother. And so back in 2008, I was able to get these letters and I read them. And my mom, you know, she passed away not knowing I had these letters. And I remember reading these letters going, who is this woman? Like, I want to get to know her, right? Because she was so fiery, right? And she really went toe to toe with my dad. There's a set of letters because they got engaged over the letters, which I did not know.
Oh, wow.
And then my dad was very frugal and he said, you know, why don't we get married like at a like city hall or something? And I distinctly remember my mother writing, the poorest people in the Philippines get married in a church. And so if you won't marry me in a church, we're not going to get married at all. And I was like, oh my God, who was this woman? Right. Like, but also too, seeing how like she was so toe to toe with my father, like me and my brother and sister suddenly made sense to me. The other thing that was kept secret in our family was my mom was a medical doctor. She has a degree in dentistry.
And you didn't know?
We had no idea.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so, yeah, because, you know, for example, when my mother died a few years ago, you know, part of the process is you go to like the funeral home and, you know, you have to answer all these questions about your parents. And like, I knew my mother had a doctorate degree, but for some reason, it never occurred to me to tell the rest of the family. So we're answering these questions. And one of the questions is, what is the highest degree, you know, what's the highest college degree that your mother has? And my brother immediately, he goes, bachelor's degree. And like I paused and I said, actually, no, she has a medical degree. So it's MD. And my brother was like, what?
What are you talking about?
And then I go, mom's a dentist, right? You know, she's like a doctor dentist. And my brother was like, no, she's not. And then I go, let's call Auntie Lily. So we called my aunt, you know, her oldest sister, and my auntie confirmed it. She goes, yeah, me and your mom we're doctors.
Wow.
You know, and so, yeah, I mean, something like that gets held back because, again, that was the price she felt she had to pay. Right. So, and I think that, you know, what I loved about this book is that what you got to do with your mom and what you still get to do with your mom is so rare, right? But it's also a very difficult process because you both have to see each other as people, right? You have to do that without feeling like you're going to absorb whatever pain, right?
We have time to process together, right? And transform the pain into joy and connection. And resiliency, right? That's what we are celebrating now. But your story is really powerful because I heard from so many children of immigrants, right? And they share very similar stories, and people read my book and they emailed me or reached out to me, wanted to share their stories or ask me, what can I do? I read your book, but I'm not sure if my parents are ready, right? So it is rare. I think that's the reason I didn't have a map to follow. When I was writing this book, right? Or unpack those stories. And my hope was writing as it is happening right now, right? So that people can read what's happening right now at the moment between these two person in love, but also carrying so much psychological burdens and pain in our lives, right? And I'm looking at my book, and I'm so thankful because I cannot remember all the details right now, right? But when I go back to read the different chapters, I realize, oh yeah, I'm so glad that we were able to writing down at the moment.
Yeah.
And it was real, and we try our best to be honest. Honest. And my hope is that someone like you, what you mentioned, right? Or someone like you mentioned those my students like that, many children of immigrants, knowing that there is a case, right?
Yeah.
And also maybe feeling a little more empowered, or knowing that it is maybe there's a hope. There's hope. That's how I see it. Yeah.
So in the book, you reference these ideas of spirituality, right? I think in the very beginning, you use that term spiritual, and then throughout the book, in these little nuggets, you talk about faith, right? Because and you know, this to me as an Asian American studies scholar, this makes sense that Koreans are there's a lot of Koreans who are Christian, and I'm curious to know. Or can you talk a little bit about your relationship with faith and how that helped to guide your healing journey, or this journey to be able to communicate with your mom?
Yes. As a child, as I mentioned, I didn't know how to access and connect with love, right? For me, one way was actually through a religion. As a child, I didn't know how to distinguish between religion and spirituality. So church and what I learned from the Bible was so precious to me back then, right? So, and then, as you can see in my story, I was so drawn to those religious, gatherings and practices. And that gave me comfort, gave me also a sense of identity. At the same time, I experienced real, breakdown, right? Or betrayal, or deception. And that was really hard to hold both. One is such a sense of identity and belonging. At the same time, there's a deception, and which is not love, and disconnection from the truth. So with my mom, in the book, we try to unpack not so much about religion per se, but our connection to something bigger than us. We call God, right? God, what's God? How we connect with God is through different ways. And I think we learn to accept different ideas about God. And also we had to process what love is, right? And also I was able to share some painful stories about this, the Christian group leader, and my own experience with my father, who's also hold this religious position in Christianity. So I tried not to be confused with those two terms, which is religion, and the other one is spirituality. And spirituality is still very powerful, important anchor in my life.
Yeah, because your story, so it's very different from me, because I grew up, like a lot of Filipinos, Catholic. And, when I was about 19, I decided I sort of made peace with the fact that as a Filipino, I will always be a cultural Catholic, because Catholicism informs so much of how we gather as families and things like that. But I made the decision to not go to church anymore, because I saw the connection between the Catholic Church and, the colonization of the Philippines. And, I felt like I just sort of had to let go of that, right? And for me, especially after my mother died, my sister and I, had very different relationships with how we would cope with our grief, right? So my brother's always at church, he's very much like a churchgoer. My sister returned to Catholicism because for her, that was her way to revisit our mother, right? Because my mother was very religious, right? And it was a way for her to reconnect with our mom, right? And I knew, and like I respect that decision. And for me, I ended up becoming a Buddhist, right? Practicing Nichiren Buddhism because that was a way for me to reconnect to my mom, and I think that, I think we forget the role of whether it be faith or like, spirituality. And to me, this isn't about selling some type, a particular type of, faith, but I do think that in these mental health spaces, right, we forget the role of faith in our healing journeys or how we manage trauma, right? Because it could be through formalized religion, but it could also be through how we understand and how we, define what spirituality is, right? Because, I know, especially because you and I are faculty people, and in our spaces, it's hard to talk about religion, right?
Right, yeah.
Sometimes it can actually be looked down upon. But what I appreciated was that you offered this space of exploration without sort of like selling any type of religion, right? But offering that space of, faith, whatever your faith is, can be this anchor for that healing journey.
Yes.
Right? So I really appreciated that.
My story actually describes my struggles with the religious group, or and also my desire to go back to practice certain religious practices. Yet, one place I'm having really hard to go back to is Korean church.
Yeah.
Not only because my trauma or my understanding of God and love, but also my loving relationship is often, many places, rejected, right? So one thing I want to remember is healing journey, experiencing God is way bigger than what I can understand. Right? And my mom, this is so powerful. My mom said, I see you and your wife, Crystal, in love. There's so much love between you. If God doesn't allow and accept your love, that's not my God. And when she said that, who actually rejected our invitation to our wedding and denied our relationship after meeting us, seeing us, and traveling with us, and process her trauma and our trauma together, now she sees love. And that's her definition of God, and that God is bigger than Korean churches and what religion preaches. So that was beautiful, and that gave me such a, the ocean of love I'm swimming in. That's how I feel.
Thank you for sharing that, because the thing that, I think the book sort of starts and ends with is your relationship with your wife. Because I do know in a lot of AA and HPI communities, because of various things, whether it be history, certain cultural norms and standards, or even different religions or faith, the LGBTQ plus community is not often welcome, right? And you talk about that, especially with your mom, right? She did not come to the wedding. And that breaks my heart, because when my husband and I got married, the thing that I remember about our wedding celebration was, I think I was just so overwhelmed by the amount of love that was in the room, because everyone that loves you is there.
Yes.
And they're there for the sole purpose of celebrating your love.
Yes.
Right? And that's when you feel like how powerful love could be.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember my mom, when we got married, my mom was alive, and his father was alive. So, we each of us had one parent, and I was just so happy to, like for our parents to witness that, right? Like in Filipino weddings, we have this tradition of, you have like the dance with the parents, right? And, so we had to sort of crisscross, like he danced with my mother.
Oh, beautiful.
And I danced with his father. And, like his father, I remember him crying and he said, when, because like when I met his mother, she had cancer and like she died a couple of years later. And, his father said, when Jose's mother met me, he said, when she met you, she knew you were the one because she had never seen Jose so happy.
Oh.
Right? And so it was just that amplification of love. And so, when I read your story and I see that your mom wasn't present for that, right? Like, I'm like, oh God, like I would imagine like the heartbreak, and especially for you to feel that, right? And so I'm never one to ask for advice, but I'm curious to know, I guess, what words do you have for people who are struggling with parents who can't, who can't accept their relationship? And also like, what words do you have for like the parents to, how can both parents and children sort of like open that, have that invitation in?
That's I don't know. I don't know how to answer. There's no one way to say it, and my way is not universal to other people. But one thing, my wife, Krista, said that they need to see me. They needed to meet me in person. Then they can humanize me and our relationship. It's not labeled as same-sex marriage or being a lesbian. It's more than that. It's love. They have to see us being in this loving relationship, how we interact, how we, cultivate our love in this house, in this family. It is a family, right? They need to experience in that. And that was true, actually. My mom met Krista instantly. She was hugging her, she was open to get to know her, and Krista did the same thing. They were just like already, they looked like they have known each other for a long time, right? So one thing I don't recommend is try to deny or avoid even having that, the contact, right? The encounter, to see each other, see each other's eyes and have conversation about love and relationship. Without that, do not judge, right? You don't know what they are having together, right? Many times it was my mom who loves searching everything online, right? And then she learned all the information from the websites and talking about Dutch culture, talking about LGBTQ, and she had no idea that information doesn't really capture what we have in spirit or emotionally, and our space. She walked in our house, she felt love in that place, right? So one thing is, I know it's painful, maybe it's against your cultural norms, your beliefs. I think it's important to see person and then have that open, vulnerable conversation about who you are, what relationship you have, what dreams you have. Without knowing the person, the judgment never works, right? So, and the other thing is, those children of immigrants and their parents are not accepting them. That's really hard. One of the reasons I left South Korea, my job, my friends, and my family, was actually coming out and desire to explore myself, right? And explore love, right? So came to the United States was actually, it's a decision, intentional decision. And coming out was very mindful decision for me, and it was a journey to fully accept myself and also fully accept and being proud of myself. It took a long time. At the same time, on that journey, I met many beautiful people supported me, loved me, and provided resources. So I want those people who are listening to this episode or watching our conversation, I want you to know that there are people out there willing to support you, listen to your stories. Maybe your parents are not ready, but there are people who are willing to be there for you.
Yeah, I think the last point I wanted to make about your book is that you're very clear about how even though the book has ended, the journey hasn't ended.
Right.
You're still getting to, you and your mom are still getting to know each other. And I think that oftentimes when we think about, how we interact with our parents or, how we interact with our loved ones, it's almost like there's this end game. But the thing is, there never is an end game. Like for me, both my parents have passed on, but like I feel like I'm always trying to get to know them, right? The mode is a little bit different because they're gone, but, like just because they're gone doesn't mean that I don't get to engage in like a healing journey myself, right? And, the other takeaway from your book is really the centrality of the storytelling, right? Like we forget how brave it is to share ourselves. We forget how brave it is to share, like to be in courageous conversations, in honest conversations.
Yeah. So one thing when people reach out to me and shared, I read your book, my reaction is like, oh my God, no, it's not like that. Okay. What would you like to? Do you like to share, or what was your reaction? I still have that, I don't know, sensation of, I don't know what to expect, what other people, experience my book and my journey. Part of me, also, I feel very vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
It's a very personal story. And not only mine, but my mother, my grandmother, parents. And so part of me, I want to talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it, right? But one thing I realized that at the end of my book, this journey was way bigger than my own, even intentionality, my own knowledge, my skills. So I had to walk with the faith and spirituality and bigger love. And when I was writing and I was going through this process, I didn't know when to end, honestly. I didn't know when to end. But I realized that maybe there's no clear end, as you mentioned. It's an ongoing process. I'm going to learn something about myself. I'm going to learn something about my parents, my mom especially. And she's still sharing more stories, right? Another layers. One thing I'm so grateful is that I see those children behind the bushes, like metaphorically, right? They are everywhere. They are in my classroom. They are at my school. There are, especially now, this book is translated in Vietnamese. I was in Vietnam meeting these young people who are affected by the Vietnam War and directly from their or indirectly from their parents, right? And what I see is I see my mom's stories. I hear my mom's stories again and again, and they're still living in the condition, right, in silence and not receiving proper support. So my heart goes to those people, and at least what I can do is I can share my book, my story. You are not alone, right? And I'm here. My story is here to maybe invite you to come out. You don't need to be behind the bushes and feeling lonely. I felt so lonely for long time, and I didn't know I was lonely. I felt so restless. I felt so rootlessness, and I didn't know where that sensation and feeling came from, right? And then I realized that it's my story, my family. The stories actually anchor me. That's my roots, right? After receiving a gift of stories, I realized that I felt grounded. I exist. There was new concept, new sensation in me. I exist because of the story telling me
Yeah.
where I came from.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that you exist, it's that you exist and that you matter.
Yes.
And there's something so powerful
Yeah.
to, come to that,
Yes.
right? And I'm sure your mother went
Yeah.
through the same thing. So, so that's
Yeah.
all I have. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah.
Roots Reclaimed is a production of the AANHPI Ohana Center of Excellence, a culturally centered behavioral health resource center aimed to empower Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. To get access to resources, referrals, trainings, workshops, and so much more, visit us at aanhpi-ohana.org. Mahalo.